There is a particular kind of pain that doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't show up as a breakdown at 2 a.m. or a conversation you finally decide to have. It shows up quietly in the way you still check someone's social media, months after they're gone, in the way a song pulls you back to a moment you swore you were over, and the way you rehearse conversations in your head with people who will never hear them. That quiet, persistent ache has a name. It is the absence of closure, and most of us are carrying far more of it than we are willing to admit. We live in a culture that celebrates moving on. We are told to let go, to keep going, to not look back. And so we learn to perform recovery. We post the vacation photos. We say, "I'm fine," with enough conviction that even we start to believe it. But underneath that performance, the unfinished business of our lives, the relationships that ended without explanation, the opportunities that collapsed without reason, the versions of ourselves we had to abandon, keeps pulling at us. The truth that psychology has consistently confirmed is this: the human brain is not designed to leave things unresolved, and when we force it to, we pay a price. This isn't weakness, this is wiring. In the 1920s, a Lithuanian psychologist named Bluma Zygarnik noticed something fascinating while sitting in a Viennese cafe. Waiters could recall every detail of unpaid orders with remarkable precision, but the moment a bill was settled, the memory faded almost instantly. This observation became what we now know as the Zygarnik effect, the psychological phenomenon that explains why incomplete tasks occupy far more mental space than completed ones. Your mind, quite literally, keeps a file open on everything that hasn't been resolved. It keeps returning to it, replaying it, searching for an ending it never received. Every relationship you didn't get to say goodbye to, every argument that ended in silence rather than understanding, every door that closed before you were ready, your brain keeps those files open. And open files consume energy. Think about the last time a relationship ended without a real conversation. Maybe they just stopped responding. Maybe the friendship dissolved so gradually you couldn't point to a single moment it ended. Maybe you were let go from a job without a real explanation, or you watched a version of your life you had carefully planned fall apart without any warning. In each of those moments, your brain was handed an incomplete story. And because human beings are meaning-making creatures, because our psychological survival has always depended on our ability to understand patterns and predict outcomes, an incomplete story doesn't just feel uncomfortable, it feels threatening. That is why people ruminate. That is why, long after a relationship has ended, you find yourself replaying specific conversations, wondering what you could have said differently, or constructing elaborate theories about what the other person was really thinking. It isn't obsession. It isn't an inability to move on. It is your nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do, searching for the missing piece of the pattern so it can finally file the experience away as understood. The tragedy is that when closure never comes, the search never fully ends. And this is where the impact becomes far more personal than most people realize. The absence of closure doesn't stay contained to the original wound. It bleeds. It shapes how you enter the next relationship, carrying with you a hypervigilance that was born in the last one. It shapes how you respond to conflict, not based on what is happening in front of you, but based on every unresolved conflicts still living in your body. It shapes your self-perception because when something ends without explanation, human beings have a deeply ingrained tendency to fill that explanatory void with self-blame. If no one told you why they left, your mind will generate a reason, and that reason will almost always be about your inadequacy. This is one of the most quietly destructive patterns in emotional life. The stories we tell ourselves in the absence of real answers become the lenses through which we see ourselves for years, sometimes decades. The friend who stopped calling without explanation becomes the evidence that you are too much to handle. The relationship that ended in silence becomes the proof that you are not worth a conversation. These aren't truths, but they feel like truths because they filled a space that nothing else was allowed to fill. What makes this even more complex is that closure is not always accessible. Sometimes the people who owe us an explanation are unwilling or unable to give one. Sometimes they are gone. Sometimes the situation itself, a sudden loss, an abrupt ending, a circumstance beyond anyone's control, doesn't offer the kind of neat resolution our nervous systems crave. And in those moments, waiting for external closure becomes its own form of being stuck. The painful and liberating truth that psychology and therapeutic practice have arrived at again and again is this: closure is ultimately an internal process. The resolution you are searching for cannot always come from outside you. It has to be built from within. This is not about pretending the hurt didn't happen. It is not about forcing yourself to feel at peace before you are ready. It is about recognizing that understanding. The real goal beneath the search for closure does not always require the participation of the person who hurt you. You can come to understand why a relationship couldn't work without ever receiving an apology. You can grieve the version of your life you lost without receiving validation that your grief was warranted. You can acknowledge what the experience cost you and what it taught you. And you can begin, gradually, to close that file yourself. Grief, in its truest sense, is the process of internally completing what external circumstances left unfinished. It is not linear and it is rarely comfortable, but it is the pathway through which the brain is finally given permission to release what it has been holding. Writing a letter you will never send. Speaking the words you never got to say out loud. Sitting with a therapist and walking through the story until it no longer controls you. These are not soft suggestions. They are neurologically meaningful acts. They are ways of providing your brain with an ending, even when life refused to offer one. Here is what is true, and what matters more than perhaps anything else in this conversation. The fact that you are still searching for closure, in whatever form that takes in your life, is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that you are human. It is a sign that what happened mattered to you, that you invested something real, that you were present enough to be affected. Your mind keeps returning to the unfinished places, not because you are broken, but because you are trying to heal. That impulse, as painful as it feels, is fundamentally healthy. It is the beginning of something, not evidence that you are stuck. The invitation is to stop treating the search for closure as a flaw and to start treating it as information. What part of you is still waiting to be understood? What story are you still carrying that was never given an ending? What would it mean to offer yourself the resolution that no one else was able to provide? You do not need their words to begin healing. You do not need their explanation to reclaim your narrative. The ending to that chapter already lives inside you, waiting to be written on your own terms. And when you finally allow yourself to write it, something shifts. The file closes. Not because the past changes. It never does, but because you finally stop waiting for someone else to give you permission to move forward. That is what closure really is. Not an answer from someone else. A decision you make for yourself.